Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for November 2020. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs. And by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/RogueWatson. You don't even have to be an active participant. You could jump right in here and lurk to your heart's content. And we are glad to have you. Shoutouts to the Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Huskar124, Wizard Princess, my favorite D&D player, Christopher, and Dave. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Yuma, Marcos Dave Vicente, Gilberto, Shane K, Cert 2B, Adam, Dithers of Lounge, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalenia, Nick. Thank you all very much for your support. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is alignment. Once a major restriction in previous editions of D&D, alignment is almost an afterthought in 5th edition. Or is it? How does player and NPC alignment factor into our games, if at all? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Tiny.
Hello.
Corey.
Hi, guys.
Dave.
Hey.
And Sam.
Morning.
Good morning. So alignment in 5th edition is a weird thing because it still exists, and I feel like the scale of law versus chaos, good and evil, is such a ubiquitous part of D&D that's even used in memes for people that really, I think, don't even know much about D&D, but I think that it's so recognizable that it's shared frequently and they have fun, putting little characters from different things in boxes and whatnot. I'm kind of the opinion that alignment, at least for players, is kind of dumb. And maybe that's a radical opinion. But I like the fact that 5th edition broke away from all these restrictions where paladins have to be of lawful alignment, bards have to be chaotic, druids have to be neutral. From a mechanical standpoint, it made multiclassing a pain in the ass, because I need to live my dream of a paladin bard without having to go through specific alignment adjustments. But from a role-playing standpoint, I guess you could use it as a guideline, but just let players be players. Tiny, thoughts on alignment?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's
Yes.
really not a big deal, in my opinion. If I'm helping someone make up a character for the first time and we get to alignment, instead of taking the time to actually explain it to him or her, I usually say, let's just leave that blank now. So it's, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I sat down and gave it a lot of thought today, but it's just more of a guideline, kind of, maybe, I mean, D&D 5e is really kind of shifted towards personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see, like in the handbook, like in ideals, it'll list an ideal, and then it'll put in parentheses like good or evil or chaotic, and so they're trying to put a little bit more meat on the bone of alignment, which I think is a good thing. Anything to help new players really flesh out their characters in fun, neat ways. So they're trying to get away from that, those 9 different boxes, and help people to connect with their characters more, which I think is a good thing. And I think that all along has always been kind of the intent of the alignment. So that's my opening thoughts.
Yeah, coming from 1st edition, and that's sort of where alignment was a big deal.
Yeah.
But it really was sort of black and white. I mean, you had a lot less character classes. It was you're looking at a stick versus a pine tree versus and the complexity of 1st edition versus 5e. But alignment was actually sort of a big deal because it helped you find it helped the characters sort of define who they were. So, for example, if you were going to be a good character, you certainly wouldn't go on a murdering spree, because that would be a little bit out of character. In the beginning, when we were playing, we always try to kind of figure it out. And then as we got older, we got into college and you start taking psychology courses, the whole black and white stuff goes away. It's like, suddenly alignment becomes the most interesting thing in the room, because now you're going into all this depth and detail of what alignment could be, and getting away from the black and white of what it might be in the first edition. So I'm a big fan of alignment, but I see it as something that guides characters and maybe even binds characters together. If you have a bunch of lawful characters, everybody, in this day and age, we live in a lawful society. We all agree that red octagons with the word stop on it, we stop when we're driving a vehicle. If you're chaotic, you might say, you know what, that doesn't apply to me today. And you blow on through. So I'm a big fan of it, but I don't like having it being a limitation. And that was a big problem back then, though. You couldn't multi-class
mechanically,
mechanically. But the more we played, the more we kind of wrote our own rules and moved past a lot of that stuff and said, okay, well, we're gonna play alignment this way, and that worked fine as it sort of evolved.
Sam, what are your thoughts on alignment?
As a player, I use alignment as a good guide as to where I want my character to go and how I want them to act, things like that. But as a DM, I put next to no thought into it. When I help my players make their characters, like Tiny, I don't get them to fill it in. I just I leave it blank. If they want to fill it in, they can. They can use it as their guide, but I think it's more important to look at the actions they're actually doing. And it's so easy for people to maybe think they're lawful good when they're actually lawful neutral. So it's somewhere close, but not quite the same. So as a DM, I don't pay a huge amount of mind to it. I think actions are more important.
For sure, alignment always felt reductive. And also kind of confusing whenever you even try to explain, like, what is lawful neutral? What does that mean? What does true neutral mean when you have something like chaotic neutral? Or what are the different levels of evil? I didn't even feel like it was necessarily a good system to begin with. But I wonder if there's a deviation between being new to D&D through 5th edition, which puts much less onus on alignment, versus somebody who has the past edition's experience and is a lot more used to having to deal with alignment. I was hoping to ask Sam that, but he just dropped out of the call.
Maybe he'll jump back in.
Hopefully. Corey, we haven't heard from you. What is your thoughts on alignment?
Well, I was surprised they didn't have alignment in the 5th edition, but then I'm a lot like Dave. I played from 1st edition till now.
Well, alignment is in 5th edition. It just doesn't mean anything anymore.
You mean you're surprised that it doesn't have mechanics to it, game mechanics?
Yeah,
okay.
I was very surprised that paladins would be allowed to be something other than lawful good.
I was surprised on that one.
That was always the big one that I think of. Yeah,
I don't have a problem with it, but I do remember a module in, I believe it was 2nd edition. It was a Vecna module where you were, your player characters are going into a realm run by undead, and there were paladins of Vecna and paladins of, of evil gods, but they had lawful good alignment. And I think it was pretty controversial, that module at the time.
Because paladins literally had to be lawful good at one time, right?
They did, yeah.
And that was the only alignment. And if you ever became non-lawful or non-good, you literally could not take more levels of paladin.
Yeah, you just became a fighter.
Right. Because that was the idea, is you were the holy good warrior, which I like the fact that now it's broken up. We're a paladin isn't necessarily a holy good warrior, it's just a zealous fighter that's believe that has divine powers. So that could be powered by any number of different, deities and doctrines. Yeah, so I love the fact that that's opened it up. Yeah, now you could be a blackguard, which that was as far back. I mean, I played Neverwinter Nights in 3rd edition. I remember they had those kind of paladins then. So, Sam, I was going to ask if you were, are you new to D&D in 5e, or have you played previous versions of D&D tabletop?
No, I started 2.5, 3 years ago. So 5e was the first edition I'd ever played.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same for me. I have a little bit of experience with 2nd, but so I wonder if that's a bit of a change there, as folks that have that older experience are more comfortable with alignment, and maybe this is Wizards' way of like slowly phasing out alignment. Like alignment still technically exists in 5th edition. People, and NPCs all have it, but to where it doesn't mean anything. To where the next edition, whenever that'll be, we just finally get rid of. Or maybe they can't. I don't know because it's so ubiquitous, but we get rid of it entirely because it's just like, look, and like Tiny was saying, characters have traits and bonds and flaws, and that stuff is way more useful when it comes to role playing than 2 words that can still decades later be a little bit confusing to explain to people.
Well, that's a good point because back in the early days you didn't have traits and flaws and all that stuff, any of that. So it really was the 2 words that were defining it.
Yeah.
So it was used as sort of a way to give your character personality.
Yeah.
But yeah, now with all the other boxes to check for being able to sort of define that in a lot greater detail and a lot greater complexity. It makes more sense that it's not as relevant in the way it used to be, and I think that's fine. But a lot of it's about is if someone creates character and a character's personality, it's just one more thing that helps keeps that character in line of who it is. If suddenly the player starts taking the character out of character, then you have, as a DM, you got to say, hey, wait a minute, is that really what that you would do, or what that your character would do in this situation, or so sometimes it's going to influence their actions.
Yeah, I ran into this that, from what I can remember most clearly, for our Tomb of Annihilation campaign. Raymond was playing I think lawful good Twirtle named George, and George would do the most batshit crazy things. And I remember several times thinking, aren't you lawful good? Like, as a kind of a joke. But it just reminded me of the fact that, like, it's too reductive. Like, it doesn't really matter. And characters can change and evolve, and they are their own personalities. Like, you could even be a good person, but for example, you could still be impulsive, although that might make you a bit more chaotic. But maybe you still, if you still stop at stop signs, but maybe you're going to buy a burrito on the way home. That's just a personality trait at that point, not necessarily your alignment.
In my opinion, alignment, like when you create a character and you say, okay, my character is in alignment, whatever. To me, it's more like a watermark that, you can like look back on later on in the campaign and think, wow, my character was good and now he's actually kind of evil, and ask yourself, like, how did I get here? Or I used to be so anti-drugs like Lawful, and now I'm hooked on cocaine like Kalinar.
Well, here's a good follow-up to that. Have any of you had characters where either you as a DM or as a player have straight up scratched out your old alignment and updated your alignment because of actions or story things?
Yes.
I think that gets a lot more interesting too.
I haven't run into that yet.
Really? Never had somebody's like just evolve into a different alignment?
Well,
not necessarily just like straight up good to evil.
It was basically you could, but then you effectively were a new character, we had this sort of same group of people playing for years and years and years that it didn't really pop up typically in a game. And in 5e, I haven't been doing it long enough, so nobody's sprung that on me yet.
What about
in playing like Tomb of Annihilation? I mean, that's a really long campaign. I think we finished up in a year, which was like record timing, but we skipped over like a whole chapter of Fang the Night Serpent. But my Dragonborn Sorcerer, he started off as good. Like I wrote it down, like, all right, he's going to be a good character. But over time, I noticed like a shift in how I played him. And he became like more hardened in his attitude towards others. And I kind of like, when I realized this as a player, I looked at it like just the campaign is what kind of changed me. It almost felt like he was responding to the horrors of the jungle of Chult and kind of like a Heart of Darkness scenario where you go in one way and you come out another.
Yeah.
And for me, like I like to do journaling for my like in character journaling, and so I did some writings just to reflect on that, and I thought it was cool. I mean, I think it's great that you can change your alignment over time in kind of gradual response to the campaign you're in.
I like your Heart of Darkness analogy, because that's that really is telling. I'm talking about. I mean, that really is about the change of alignment in a character, and that's a perfect description in how it evolves.
That's another good reason.
Should be allowed to evolve.
That's another good reason. Yeah, exactly. Why I think it's good that they decoupled alignment away from classes, because
definitely
before it was and I've played video games like that too, where it's like Mass Effect is a good example of this, where you're rewarded for playing a certain way. Like in Mass Effect, it was you're all basically good or all evil. And when I played the very first game way back in the day, I role-played. Like, I played each section individually, and I was like, man, in this scenario, I'm going to make this decision. In this scenario, I'm going to make this decision. And then by the end of the game, I realized, I actually did not, optimize my playthrough, because I wasn't making, all of the blue choices or all of the red choices, because it's very reductive in that game. It's just, you're either 100% good or 100% an asshole. And you get rewards if you're going along those paths, to where at the very, very end of the trilogy, you've got this big moment where you could basically solve this thing via a social check, but you had to have gone all the way one direction, all the way to the other, which is the opposite of rewarding role-playing, because you're not role-playing at that point. You're always just choosing one. I mean, I guess technically if you want to role-play that exact path, but I would have rather it, somehow just rewarded me for role-playing my own unique character that treated all these concepts individually. And that's what D&D used to do. If you were lawful good, I'm just going to play and make these same decisions. And if I want to keep being a paladin, there's no option for me to really change and make different kind of decisions. Otherwise, I'll have to multi-class into a fighter. Maybe I don't want to do that. So I'm really glad they separated that, because A, it's a pain in the butt, and I think multi-classing is fun. As somebody who only plays basically multi-class disasters, I appreciate that. And
I remember, early edition, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but, if you are a good cleric, you could only use blunt weapons. You couldn't use bladed weapons. But if you were an evil cleric, you could use bladed weapons. It's just weird. I'm like, really? It just didn't make sense to me.
That's because they had gone to the dark side.
Yeah. Just weird restrictions.
One thing I found alignment useful for was and still I find it useful for new players, especially at lower level, because they're trying to understand the game. They're still new and shiny. The character's still new and shiny, and they haven't gotten into the dark horrors of reality of the game. Later on when they're higher levels, and I'm always good with people. I like characters to evolve. I don't want to. It's kind of boring if someone stays. In fact, the only character who ever really had to stay true to their alignment was the paladin, but everybody else could sort of shift. And so the paladins became sort of nutbag fanatics in the long run. And you had to really dig in to play it if you were going to play one forever.
What about NP? So the one thing I think alignment is useful at, because in my opinion, I really give a shit what the player alignment is anymore. I was making fun of Raymond's character because he's lawful good and making all this crazy shit happen, but honestly, I don't think it makes one way or difference. But the one place where I think alignment is still useful for me is it is a useful shorthand for NPCs, because when they describe, I use a lot of the 5e written adventures, and when they describe an NPC and just put them in maybe it's just a single parenthetical description that says, lawful evil tiefling veteran. That's not a lot of information, but at least I get an idea of, okay, they are kind of an evil, selfish, but still works within, ranks or some, respects hierarchy and all that kind of thing. So that's a useful shorthand for me. So
yeah, it makes perfect sense.
NPCs is still where I see alignment being useful, just because not every NPC needs to have its own, motivation and traits and bonds and flaws and all that. I think, obviously the more important NPCs probably should have full-on role-playing notes, but for just very, very quick, at-a-glance NPCs are going to use, having that that's one of those 9 slots is still pretty useful.
Yeah, I figure if the NPC's wearing a red shirt, that's all the personality is going to get is a 2-word definition of where it fits on that chart.
Like one defining trait or something.
Yeah, it's helpful for like on the fly decision making, because if it's like a monster, you don't really, or maybe some sort of random monster that the party tries to role play with. One scenario is my players were negotiating with a manticore, and they agreed to a deal, and inside
you can negotiate with a manticore.
You can. I mean, this one was injured, so but they were inciting him like it was the manticore going to uphold his end of the bargain. And so I just really quick looked at the alignment and saw that he was lawful evil, I think. And because he was lawful, I felt like, okay, he is evil, but he is lawful, so he probably would honor his agreement, for now at least,
Yeah.
And so I think for on the fly monsters, NPCs, it can be kind of help guide you in these role play scenarios.
Yeah. Sam and Corey, you all have been quiet. Sam, what do you think about NPC alignment?
I don't think I've ever actually thought about alignment for my NPCs. I tend to give them an ideal and then make their decisions based around what's going to achieve their ideal, unless it's an important NPC that is going to be popping up again in the future once they've sort of filled their role, or that they've been involved in the conversation, or they've been murdered by whatever group of hobos you're playing with. Once they've fulfilled that goal and that ideal, you're not going to see them again. So it's never seemed that important to me.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if I'd have the patience to give every NPC. I get, is ideal the motivation? I actually get that. Actually, kind of confuses me too, because they have traits. This is almost a separate topic. Traits, bonds, flaws, and ideals. I feel like I get bond and ideal confused. I think
probably so do I.
One of them is like something you care about, and the other thing is something you want to do. But those things could be one and the same in some cases. Like the parts gets a little tricky. But go ahead.
I'd just give them something really simple to achieve. Like if it's a quest giver, then the thing they want to do is give the party the quest, and they're going to make decisions and conversation choices that lead to that end. If the party needs convincing, then they will use information they have to try and convince them, or if the party just want money, then they'll offer the money. Then so it's a really simple direction that's going to take them to let the NPC take the players where they need to be.
Corey, how do you feel about NPC alignment?
Well, I think it's very important when it comes to like outsiders and planar beings. Like that's the key difference between demons and devils, right? And angels and archons and that kind of stuff. I think that's very important for the monsters and NPCs.
All right, yeah. Explain to the rest of us and to anyone listening what is the difference between demons and devils.
Well, the difference is that the whole thing. What is it? The Greyhawk background story from D&D, the Blood Wars. How the lawful evil demons or lawful evil devils are fighting the chaotic evil demons, and the only reason that they don't all pour into the material plane and take us all out is because they're busy fighting each other. This is old school background,
which
stuff.
I think is still the case in 5e, right? That's still
the War of Blood's still happening.
Yeah.
It happens in Avernus. I've spent a long time there, so I'm
nice.
quite familiar with that conflict.
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys have ever come across this, but intelligent magic items used to be quite a thing in the older editions, and they had alignments attached to them as well, and it was all about how well this new sword that maybe was lawful good was going to do with your chaotic good character.
That's a good point.
And
like you couldn't get it out of the stone if you didn't have the right alignment.
Yeah, or it wouldn't let you pick it up. That was quite a common thing in.
That's true.
Edition.
We
Yeah.
just came across that. It was a wizard's type robe in 5e. I forget what it was called.
A
But
custom
yeah,
item
Robe of the
or in
Archmage?
the one that in
no,
the player handbook?
It's in the
Okay.
player handbook, I think.
Robe of the Archmage, I believe.
Yeah,
That has an
that's
alignment
it.
restriction?
Yeah.
Well, it was a black robe of the Archmage, so kind of like Dragonlance, where they had like white, red, and black. The black robe of the Archmage
Okay.
can only be attuned by somebody who is evil, apparently, and so
Oh.
we came across it. Bad guy had an evil robe, and nobody could use it, so I think we sold it for cheap.
Yeah, if you use those things, you would also take damage if you were like the wrong alignment, or you could be poisoned or killed,
Or you suffered a negative level. Or
Yeah.
something.
No, I don't like any of that.
Change your alignment or something, and then all of a
Yes.
sudden,
What I would do is treat it like a cursed item that corrupts it, like the One Ring, because I think
Yeah.
a lot of players can respond very well to that. Is have and it's a risk reward thing at that point. Like, to me, anybody can use this item, but it's an evil ass item, and if you use it, it's gonna corrupt you. And
It's a really good idea.
how
Yeah,
it corrupts
no,
you
that's a
is
good
kind of
way
up
to think
to
of it.
Really good idea.
yeah. But I think I played around with that with Prince of the Apocalypse, with the whatever they call the big elemental weapons they had. The players
Yeah,
have recovered
Davis.
one or
That's
two
right.
of those. Yeah.
Eric, how did you find when your players were gaining flaws in the Tomb of Annihilation? Did that not represent more of an alignment shift when they were possessed by the gods? Like, don't they all tend to have an alignment set up?
Yeah, the gods are all supposed to. Are they supposed to reflect certain alignments? I know they were supposed to be across from each other, and the whole gag is that you're supposed to put the stones in the 9 slots, and those are the 9 alignments. I know the one snail is supposed to be in the middle.
They do have
Are they
alignments.
specifically okay? Like, I know, like,
Right.
Wongo was evil, I think, but in terms of the flaws being represented, I don't. It just kind of added another character trait. I don't think it necessarily. The one interesting one would have been, which spoilers for our Tomb of Annihilation campaign, because Chris very wisely and quickly got rid of the one that made him go after like treasure really quickly, which that one I guess is technically selfish, so would technically shift you to evil. But I don't know, avarice is just so. For me, the better way to do character, I'm not even sure I would do traits, bonds, and flaws and ideal. I mean, I would do 2 things. One, give the characters their own quest arc in a campaign. And B, when you're designing your character, give me 5 adjectives to describe that character. And they can be whatever you want. You can be, daring. You can be kind. You can be commanding, domineering, punctual, whatever, fast, slovenly, whatever words you want to come up with to describe your character. They can all be good, they can all be bad, they can be a mix of things. Those 5 adjectives describe your character, and that should give everybody a good handle on how they see their character, how they want to role play this character. And then with the quest arc, that is your bond/ideal, because when you're making a character, your bond could be like, well, I'm tied to my home village I came from. Well, that's great, but this campaign takes place here, and we're never going to go to that village. That's how I usually end up having to design the campaigns, especially with Tomb of Annihilation, because it was all in Schultz. Like, I can't deal with any of your hometown bullshit. So to me, that stuff just replaces all of the character development, and then alignment is so far behind all of that it was mentioned in our games, I think, player alignment, but it doesn't really come into play that much. Have any of you tried to do that character trait, the adjective thing? I pulled that from somewhere.
I actually, am I muted? Yeah,
No, I can hear you.
No, I can hear it.
My wife walked in the room. I can't remember if I muted myself or not. No, I actually, it's funny. I was actually watching when you were doing the character creation with your characters for Tomb of Annihilation, and you had that. And I thought that's a great idea, because that's something they can follow. That will follow them deeper into their character personalities than just straight alignment.
Yeah.
So I did have everybody do something like that, and then my son comes along and he says, "Well, everybody should have a quirk." I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be great, well,
Oh,
it
yeah.
perks too, So, but it gets players, and particularly new players, thinking about their characters. I have a mix of people who've been playing a long time, or played a long time ago, and are new back to it, and some people who just haven't really played before, and it's interesting because the older players are adapting to it much quicker to the system. They know how to role play, and they know what's important and what isn't, and that has to do with just the quality of the player. And then newer players are they're naive, they don't get it, and you're like, okay, pick someone out of a book you like, put some character out of a book, and,
or TV show or movie, whatever you want to do.
Start with that, and then you can evolve it. And that gives someone sort of an idea, someone to sort of model or channel as they go. Though you do have to be careful about who people channel, because there's some characters you just don't want in your campaigns.
Yeah, if someone wants to play like the strong silent type, like that's a bit of a red flag, because it's going to be tough to roleplay that, and you're always going to be taking a backseat.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it requires dungeon master approval prior to final acceptance, but.
I forgot about the quirk thing. That was something that we had just started for Tomb, and I had really a lot of fun making this. I think I made a D100 table of quirk, which to me that is like that was the replacement. Well, I think we still had like ideals, monstrates, and all that, but that was the more interesting thing from a flaw. Was like, this is some kind of debilitating thing for your character. It could have been a literal phobia, or it could be something that maybe you're just too aggressive, or something along those lines, where it was generally a bad thing. And for the life of me, I don't even think I could remember what anybody chose, because I think we almost quickly forgot about them. But what ends up happening, like somebody was like, I think George is supposed to be like super clean, like a neat freak or something, and that just never played in. And partly it's just because it's a long campaign, you kind of forget. But it was more effective to develop those flaws over the course of the campaign, is what I realized. Like you develop all those inside jokes and gags, and maybe like some monster does a crit on your character, so now you've kind of developed a phobia for that character. The video game The Outer Worlds did this very, very well, whereas it had flaws, but you had to unlock them via something terrible happening to you. So like you took like a big explosion that almost killed you, and then it would pop up on a screen and say, hey, do you want your character to now be weak against explosions because of this? And on the flip side, we'll give you like whatever it was, an extra skill point or something. There was some mechanically way of making it an interesting risk-reward thing, but I liked the way that the flaws developed during the course of the game, rather than actually having to choose them at the beginning. Even though, from my standpoint, it was like, oh, this is going to be a fun way to further, realize your character. But I think what I've come around to thinking of now is that maybe it's more fun to just organically develop those flaws and let the player just completely be in charge of how they have. And obviously the biggest flaw would be for George's hatred of the grung, which was just so perfect and became just like the most important thing in that campaign. And that's
like
not
the darkest dungeon flaws, right? Where you go into
Yes.
you spend too long into an area and you come out with cove. What do they call it? Fear of the cove or whatever.
Yeah, that one, it was a lot of the sanity stuff, but that one definitely had like straight up debilitate. That one, it almost worked like lingering injuries, but mentally, where they all just like stuck with you and you had to heal them, which would be an interesting way to change the lingering injury system, or add to it if you had a sanity system in your D&D game. That would be, Darkest Dungeon would be a pretty good way of doing that. What else?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, what else have we not covered about alignment now? We talked about possibly shifting alignment. When did it start? What was the alignment like in 4th edition for those of you that played it? Was it still pretty restrictive in classes? Did anybody play 4th edition?
Yeah, I never played.
Trick question.
I went from 1 to 5, so.
Oh, why?
With a little gap in there, with a few years in between.
Yeah.
A few decades in between.
Yeah, I went 1, 2, 3, skipped 4, and went straight to 5 afterwards.
Okay.
I went to Gen Con and I played 4E there, like one session. Yeah, I don't really remember much.
It's that memorable.
I remember because I'd started on first edition, second edition, and played a little bit of like 3.5, and then when I got to 4E, it just felt like feels weird, and I don't think this is how I'm gonna get back into D&D. It changed so much. That's what I remember. Then fifth edition.
Somebody watching this in the comments will be able to explain how fourth edition worked, and because I'm interested to see if it was a gradual thing or if fifth edition really was a hard like, no, we're gonna really get rid of all these different restrictions we had for alignment. Although I think it was Corey made a good point about magic items still having some alignment restrictions, and I'm pretty sure that is still a thing. Although and there's still some class restrictions for magic items too. But yeah, I would be tempted. Honestly, most of the time whenever I look at those restrictions, I'm getting rid of them. And I have used, sometimes I've replaced items, and other times I've just straight up gotten rid of those class restrictions. Because that's just, I mean, what's the point of including an item in your campaign if your players can't use it? That's
if it's not adding anything.
Yeah.
You know. They're
just going to throw it on their pile of loot. Like, that's no fun. I mean, it's different. Exactly. In a video game, you can throw loot at the player, I think, and it's because they're just going through monsters and getting equipment at a much faster rate, whereas in D&D, all that shit is way slowed down, so all those things have to matter, and loot, I think, has to matter. I don't think you can just find something that, unless that becomes, the object of your story is like you found this evil item that nobody can use, but oh shit, we gotta, I don't know, throw it into Mount Doom, or whatever equivalent of that is.
Alignment also seems to be very connected to the Pantheon. Like, you have a list of gods, and next to that god's name, there's usually always like, this god is lawful evil, or
that's true,
good. So I'm not really sure. Like, I probably often when I'm like creating a character, I won't care so much what my character's alignment is, but when I go to pick like, right, what god is he, I'll try to pick something based upon alignment that fits my character, but even that seems kind of meaningless.
Well, I think it's good for relationships of different types of characters and different kind of NPCs. So, if you look at the sort of as a pie chart, and where do the different characters fall within it, you can immediately see, oh, I've got a character who plays this, and these gods of these very different alignments probably aren't going to be appropriate. So I think it provides a quick sort of visualization of where things sort of just sort of the adjacencies or relationships of that. I was thinking, you got me thinking about when you talk about gods. I was also thinking about like when you get groups of monsters. I don't know, say like kobolds or something. There's a whole slew of them. Are they all the same alignment? Or some little different, some here, some there? How can you play with that into the game? Maybe there's a goblin who's not an evil goblin. Yeah. He's a good goblin, and he's like, feels really out of place in his world.
Oh, I would definitely hope most sentient creatures would have. That could also be a topic for another day, but excuse me as I
versus nurture, right?
Choke on my words. Yeah, I would love to see all sentient creatures have a diversity of morality, because that's such a bad part of the Tolkien era of fantasy to me, and I may get hate for this, but I don't want to see. I don't think all orcs should be evil. That's just boring to me. Like, it's even Warcraft, which had the very classic evil orcs, they even added a lot of really cool nuance to their orc and their storytelling, basically by claiming the orcs were, for lack of a better term, like possessed by demons, and they had like demon blood going through them, and then after they rejected them, they became just kind of normal folks who are just misunderstood. That to me is always going to be more interesting and better storytelling. Now you can still have ferocious monsters, and obviously the ones that are strictly alignment based, your demons, devils, and angels, they're all gonna even then, I think it can get interesting if you can create somebody that's maybe a little bit shades of gray. To me, that's just fun storytelling versus like, oh, they're orcs, they're all evil. I think that's just too much. It's just too easy and kind of lazy. So in terms of so to answer your question, yes, I think a mixture of alignment is very good. You could still have a group of evil orcs for sure, but I think it gets more interesting if that universe has the potential for just all kinds. If everything had the breadth of humanity, in other words, right. I think that gets way more interesting. And I would love to see. I don't necessarily need wizards to go through and say like there are 7 orcs here. 3 of them are neutral evil. 2 of them are lawful neutral. You know, I don't think that's going to help me at all much. But I mean, they could mention like some names, and these folks are, you know, not necessarily gonna, you know, fight at the drop of a hat or something like that. And then
it also lends to role play opportunities instead of just pure fight. So,
yeah, and you can still do that for sure. I mean, you could still have just straight up evil, you know, same thing as just a bunch of human thugs just gonna fight, you know, at the drop of a hat. Like, you could definitely still do that, but I do think it's more interesting if you've got, you know, sentient creatures that are capable of making decisions, if those decisions can lead them to good or evil ways. You can definitely have races that are super oppressed and they generally lash out in a bad fashion and they're lower class and all that. That's an interesting topic of discussion, but yeah, I would like definitely more nuance than like all orcs are neutral evil or something, which unfortunately I think is kind of the default. Correct me if I'm wrong, like, because like there is an orc stat block in the monster manual, and I don't know, maybe I need to flip through it or something. Does it say like alignment any, or does it say alignment like neutral evil or something?
I think that's chaotic evil
or chaotic, yeah.
Things around here somewhere.
So I actually don't know the answer to that, but for my universes I would always try to create more complex situations there, and I think that always just gets more fun and interesting to me when players can meet exotic creatures and then talk to them, and then meet other exotic creatures and then kill them. And sometimes it could be the same kind of creature.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. There's a misconception sometimes that people think everything of the same alignment is aligned with each other.
Yeah,
that is not necessarily the case.
But that might be a problem of the alignment system from those old editions. Is like every creature, like every orc, you know, maybe there's a couple different orc stat blocks, but they all have like one alignment.
Yeah, they're all chaotic evil.
Yeah, but like orcs are like there's a whole bunch of people. Like orcs are just a shit ton of, you know, they're not just an occasional monster you find. So I think that all needs to be updated to say like, I don't know, alignment any, although, you know, you could. And I think there is I'm pretty sure people in the comments will say like, well, they're, you know, the orcs are born from Grumpsh and they've got evil running through their veins. Like, I don't like any of that. That's
actually how it's written in the handbook.
Yeah,
is that the, you know, Grumpsh created orcs kind of like in his or hers, I don't know what Grumpsh is, image. But yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be a monolith.
Maybe that's
right?
maybe that's the problem, because
it just kind of
a lot of these other sentient races
makes it
have
a little bit more boring.
Yeah, they have only like the one deity that represents like their whole thing. Except for gnolls. Fuck gnolls. Hyenas just freak me out. No, maybe Lion King.
That is a change from version 1.
Maybe Lion King fucked me up, but gnolls are always evil. Up to no good. They've got that creepy ass laughter. They've got like the most powerful like jaws like on Earth or something. Like, come on. That thing will tear you up. Fuck you, Yinagu, or whatever your name is.
They weren't too bad in Kung Fu Panda. I mean,
is there a gnoll in Kung Fu Panda?
Yeah, like hyena looking.
Or a hyena looking.
Yeah, they've got hyenas, but because of course the animals all like stand up. But,
all right. The topic of next month is going to be hyenas. And
excellent.
It's just
2 hour special.
Yeah, hyenas is just the topic. Hyenas question mark is the topic. Hyenas?
There you go. Well, now you mentioned gnolls, I'll have to make sure I throw some in my next campaign, just to screw with people.
They're freaky. They're so freaky. Are they from first edition? Because whoever decided like a sentient gnoll is a monster, or a sentient hyena, a bipedal humanoid hyena is a scary monster. I fucking agree with that 100%. That's messed up.
Well, the early artwork wasn't nearly as interesting as the current artwork.
Yeah.
It was more like stick figures, you know.
All right. Final thoughts on alignment. Sam, let's start with you.
I don't think it's massively important. I tend to use it much more as a player to guide my early decisions as a character than I do as a DM. I tend to forget it exists a lot, and just use people's goals to determine what they would like to do.
I agree. Corey, final thoughts on alignment.
Well, I think I'm in the minority in the group. We still use it on all our characters, and I don't have a problem with telling somebody that that's playing a paladin that they did. But if they want to play a character that's I don't know, leans a different way, I'm fine with it too. But they might want to be that matches their belief system. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think we all still use alignment. It's just different how much we adhere to it. Dave, final thoughts on alignment?
You know, I'm still sort of treating it as I treated it in first edition, but because of all the extra character traits and everything else that I'm using, it's less important. I see it, for me, it's more important in the beginning, early stages of the character development. But once the character sort of finds its path, the alignment is it's more of a general, sort of a general placeholder, less restrictive. If someone does something out of character, they're not going to get penalized. You stepped away from your alignment. You did something bad. Well, life in the big bad world of Dungeons and Dragons occurs. So sometimes other decisions will get made for other reasons. So I still use it, but I don't. It's not dictating everything about how a character behaves.
Sure. Tiny, final thoughts on alignment?
Yeah, I'd say alignment is something that nobody should feel bound to, because when you're immersed in a long-term campaign, it kind of makes sense that your morality and your societal attitudes might shift in response to like the happenings of the campaign, and that's okay. In terms of character development, it's actually pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like if there was a specific system built around alignment, that's going to be weird because I don't even know if I want to make role-playing a mechanical thing, but it would be interesting if you could reward people by adhering to certain alignments while still I don't even know if I can describe this well enough, but you could give them different bonuses or rewards for going like lawful good or lawful evil, and that would give them some kind of buff or something. That's too much of a video game background for me, but that would at least make that system slightly more interesting to me. But at the same time, just let people role play, and I think I like that 5th edition doesn't really care about alignment too much. I think folks can still use alignment. It can still be a useful tool at character creation. I think it certainly becomes less useful the longer you play that character and you develop a more complex understanding of who that character is, what they're all about, how they would treat some situations. And you could play that character for a while and still not know how they would handle some extreme situations, which is probably the case of a lot of us in real life too, is you just don't know until you've actually been thrust into that circumstance. So, right. Alignment can be a useful guideline, but ultimately I am satisfied, I guess, that 5e doesn't require us to care about it as much as previous editions. That's one of the things that I do like about 5th edition. Folks, this has been an excellent discussion. Thank you to Tiny, Corey, Dave, and Sam for joining me for this month's DM Roundtable. I am Eric. Hope to see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable discussion.
Goodbye.
Thank you much.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.